Imagine what it must feel like to get a total body rash, to have constant itching, pain, and skin peeling off in sheets. Medications are supposed to help fight disease, not cause it. But what happens when things go wrong, as what is pictured in this photograph of cutaneous skin reactions? This is one of many adverse reactions that can occur due to drugs. Others include kidney failure and liver failure, which are less visibly noticeable. Good afternoon. My name is Christine Chamberlain. I'm a pharmacist and a commissioned officer in the Public Health Service. I work for the Food and Drug Administration in the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology. I specifically work in the area that reviews adverse drug reaction reports, and my area of focus is in diabetes medications. Today we will journey from the clinical assessment by you as a healthcare provider to the regulatory process of adverse drug reactions for a better understanding of the role you play in this process. Your contribution impacts safe medication use and improves public safety. My objectives today are to define adverse drug reactions and pharmacovigilance, to discuss the importance of post-marketing surveillance, to review the basic principles of adverse drug reaction assessment and reporting, and to describe the regulatory processes for adverse drug experiences. According to the World Health Organization, an adverse drug reaction is a response to a drug that is noxious and unintended and that occurs at doses used in clinical practice. You as healthcare providers will experience patients presenting with adverse drug reactions at some point in your career. What you do in your practice and the information that you obtain will have a global health impact. As healthcare providers, you play an integral role in pharmacovigilance. And this is basically the science and activities related to the detection and assessment, understanding and prevention of adverse effects or any other drug-related problems. You specifically are integral in the part of detection and assessment. The ultimate goal with pharmacovigilance is to promote safe use of medications. We will now review post-marketing surveillance. But before I begin, I want to present my first challenge question. True or false? Safety data is only collected during the later phases of clinical development program for a medical product. If you answered false, you're correct. Safety data collection is not limited to the later phases of clinical development program. Safety data collection is done throughout the clinical development program of a product, as depicted in this slide. Do we know anything about safety prior to the approval of its use? The answer is yes, but this information is limited. And why is this the case? Well, first let me briefly describe the drug approval process. Drugs are developed for a specific purpose based on their pharmacology or drug action. This is a very involved process that takes many years of development and study. Although the drug may have a targeted effect, it may cause undesirable effects along the process. Throughout development and drug approval process, reactions are being monitored to determine a risk-benefit profile. First, in the preclinical studies, these are studies that are conducted in animals to review the biology of the product. In phase 1, we are looking more at the dose and the tolerability and the pharmacological action. And this is generally done in 20 to 80 healthy volunteers. And it's important to note that this is in healthy volunteers. In phase 3, studies are conducted in several hundred to several thousand patients to confirm what we found in phase 2, basically to prove that phase 2 studies are correct. And we get additional information during this time period on safety because the study duration is a little longer in a larger population. During this process, if there are any risks or adverse drug reactions that develop, we are thinking about ways to minimize the risk, as shown on the bottom of this slide. During this time period, we may be thinking about risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, also known as REMS. And I will describe these in more detail later in the slide presentation. Once the drug gets approved by the FDA, safety surveillance continues. It does not end here. Phase 4 studies and post-marketing monitoring or surveillance is conducted. The drug approval process takes anywhere from 12 to 18 years. So you may ask yourself, why don't we know enough about the safety of these products? The reason is because of the limitations to the pre-marketing trials. The size of the population is only a few thousand, and now the drug will be used in hundreds to millions of patients. The drug will be used for a longer period of time in a broader population, with many other comorbid diseases or advanced disease. During clinical trials, enrollment may consist of only the healthiest of eligible patients and may not be entirely representative of the population that will be receiving the drug once it gets marketed. Additionally, risk factors for ADRs are not completely addressed in the preclinical trials and pre-marketing clinical trials. Groups such as the elderly or pediatric patients are often excluded from these studies, as well as patients that may have genetic risk factors that may not have been identified during these trials. An example of this is the HIV/AIDS drug abacavir. Once abacavir came on the market, there were reports of patients experiencing severe hypersensitivity reactions leading to disability and sometimes death. And this was because it was all of a sudden being used in a much larger population. Post-marketing surveillance and your involvement in this process is so important because, as mentioned, we know the limitations of the clinical trials. Plus, we know that adverse drug reactions are projected to increase. And this is due to increasing number of new medications that are coming on the market or new uses for existing medications. It's also due to our aging population and expanded use of medications not only to treat disease but also to prevent disease. As we increase the number of medications available and the number of possible combinations, as well as the number of comorbid illnesses that patients may have, the risk exponentially increases, and therefore we need post-marketing monitoring. Benefits of post-marketing monitoring include the detection of low-frequency reactions such as Stevens-Johnson syndrome, the cutaneous drug reaction that I depicted in the first slide, as well as drug-induced liver injury. These are rare events, and larger numbers of patients taking the drug to see these types of reactions. For drugs used for chronic use, the duration now is much longer than what was studied during the clinical trials. So drugs are accumulating more, being given over a longer period of time, and some of the adverse drug reactions may develop post-marketing. An example of a long-term use of a drug is the drug class protease inhibitors used for HIV/AIDS. Once the two drugs that are on the market were used for a period of time, specifically ritonavir and indinavir, patients started developing a large fat patch on the back of the neck. There are several different ways we can collect information on adverse drug reactions after drug approval. I will specifically focus on spontaneous or voluntary reporting of cases. In this section, we have the national system, the FDA MedWatch system, or you may have a local or regional reporting system where you report adverse drug reactions that occur while treating your patients in the hospital or a clinic. And this may be an occurrence reporting system in the individual hospital. We also can get cases of adverse drug reactions from the scientific literature through publications or case reports. Other types of post-marketing surveillance include observational studies, where you look at large automated healthcare databases, or randomized clinical trials, also known as phase 4 trials, in the post-marketing period. This may also include epidemiology trials, and in these situations, patients are put on the drug and followed for long periods of time. The other type of post-marketing surveillance includes active surveillance. These include the drug-induced liver injury network, which is a prospective form of following patients that experience a drug-induced liver injury. The Sentinel initiative is another method, and this enables FDA to actively query diverse automated healthcare data holders like electronic health records, administrative and insurance claim databases, and registries to evaluate the possible medical product safety issue quickly and securely. As mentioned, my focus will specifically be on spontaneous or voluntary reporting of cases. This is an unsolicited communication from an individual, such as a healthcare professional or a consumer, to a company or a regulatory authority that describes a suspected adverse experience. These reports are submitted to the FDA MedWatch reporting system. So now we will move into adverse drug reaction assessment and reporting for the healthcare provider. But before I begin, I want to present our second challenge question. True or false? Healthcare providers are required to report all adverse drug events. If you answered false, you are correct. It is voluntary for healthcare providers, but required for manufacturers. Although it's not required for healthcare providers, I'd like you to think about this situation. We're not required to brush our teeth, but it's a good idea for our health. I would like you to think about that when you see a patient having an adverse drug reaction. It's so important for you to report that event to help the health of other people. I'd like you to keep in mind this case presentation in the next few slides. A 70-year-old female patient presents to your office with a diffuse rash that started 3 days earlier. Last week she was seen for a follow-up of her type 2 diabetes, and drug X at 10 milligrams daily was added to her existing regimen of metformin. Other medications included a statin and lisinopril, which she has taken for 2 years for hyperlipidemia and hypertension. She reports no changes in her diet or skincare products. On exam, she has hives and complains of itching and chest tightness. What can you do to assess whether or not the event that's described in this case is an adverse drug reaction? Well, first, I want you to start by evaluating drug labels, or the package, also known as the package insert, for the adverse drug reaction risk. Examples of 2 excellent sources that contain up-to-date drug label or package insert information are Daily Med and Drugs at FDA. Daily Med provides trustworthy information about marketed drugs, but does not contain all drugs. It is sponsored by the National Library of Medicine as a public service and does not accept commercial advertisement. This website provides a standard, comprehensive, and up-to-date look-up and download resource of medication content and labeling found in the package insert. In this resource, it may also include, for example, strengthened warnings undergoing FDA review or minor editorial changes. So this resource contains recently submitted package insert information to the FDA. Drugs at FDA is another source for the FDA-approved label. This is also an excellent source for approval history, where you can obtain information from the pre-approval review, such as information about the pharmacology of the drug or the biopharmaceutics of the drug. The summary review in Drugs at FDA provides a nice overview of the drug studies conducted during the clinical development program. Also in Drugs at FDA, you will find medication guides available. And I will describe more about medication guides when I go over the REMS, or risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, towards the end of this lecture. Review safety alerts at the FDA website or international regulatory agency sites. Also review published literature, such as case reports, reviews, and perhaps phase 4 clinical trials that are being published. Other drug information resources include liver tox, which is specific to hepatotoxicity from drugs, and Micromedex, which is an example of an evidence-based drug information resource containing information on adverse reactions and drug interactions. By assessing the ADR risk in these drug information resources, you're specifically looking for characteristics about the drug, the pharmacology of the drug, how it's metabolized, how it's absorbed. These are all things to pay attention to when reviewing an adverse drug reaction. Clinically, if you suspect a drug may be the cause based on your review, you would remove the drug, provide an alternative therapy, administer an antidote, and/or provide supportive care. But also, I want you to collect information that is important to assess causality, the relationship between the drug and the adverse event. Report even if you're unsure the event was caused by the drug. You do not need to know definitively if there is an association between the drug event. This slide reinforces the sections of the package insert that you can review for important safety information. So not only the adverse drug reaction section, but also the drug interaction section, the contraindications, and the warnings and precautions. When looking at the package insert, besides looking at these sections, it's important to look for guidance and information in these other sections. Review contraindications and warnings and precautions as they are listed earlier in the package insert. This is designed to put the most serious known risks at the beginning of the package insert to give prominence to these. The new label format, known as the physician label rule, is easy to read and locate these specific sections. New drugs that are coming onto the market follow the physician label rule, and old drugs are slowly being transitioned to this format. Many factors can influence whether or not a patient experiences an adverse event. Some patients you will see in clinic or in the hospital may have additional risk factors for developing an adverse drug reaction that was not detected in the clinical trials, because often these subgroups are excluded from these types of studies. Also, the population may not have included certain ethnic groups that may have a genetic predisposition to an adverse event. Gather as much evidence as possible to review all possible causes of the event and rule out other possible causes. So ask yourself these questions about the case that I presented earlier. Did the event occur after the drug was administered? And what was the time period until onset? In our case, the medication was given before the event, and the event occurred approximately 1 week later. Was the drug removed and the event improved? This is also known as de-challenge. Our case lacks this type of information, but this would be very useful to have. Was the drug re-administered and the event reappeared? And this is also known as re-challenge. This did not occur in our case and may not be done due to ethical reasons depending on the severity of the adverse event. You also want to include objective information. Were there any laboratory tests that could confirm this adverse drug reaction? Also, are other possible explanations ruled out? In our case, some other explanations were ruled out. As they noted in the report, she did not have any changes in her diet, and she did not have any changes in her topical products that were given. By answering these questions, you are beginning the process of assessing causality. Why is causality so important? It aids in our understanding of the adverse drug event and may help in developing ways to improve or prevent the adverse event. There are tools available to assess causality and assign a probability classification. One is the Naranjo Adverse Drug Reaction Probability Scale, and the second is the World Health Organization Causality Assessment System. These systems apply classifications, such as the event was definite, probable, possible, or doubtful that it was associated with the drug. The World Health Organization classification uses the causality outcomes certain, probable, possible, unclassified, and unassessable. Each one of these causality terms has a corresponding assessment criteria that is applied to your individual case. This slide shows an example of the Naranjo ADR probability scale. This is often used in medical institutions. You answer the following questions that are listed, and it yields a score for each of the questions. These scores are then added up for a total score and gives a corresponding classification. And in this hypothetical situation, the adverse event was probable in relation to the drug. Detecting and documenting potential adverse drug reactions is very important because if undetected, you may expose the patient to unnecessary medications that may add additional risk to that patient. Also, proper documentation can prevent future harm for your patient and for other patients. Now that you have gathered all of the information, it is time to report it. Remember, spontaneous reporting is an unsolicited communication from an individual, such as a healthcare provider or a consumer, to a company or regulatory authority that describes a suspected adverse experience. These reports are submitted to the MedWatch reporting system. And basically, the MedWatch system is a repository for these adverse event reports. The MedWatch system also collects reports on medication errors and product quality issues, besides adverse drug reactions. FDA is particularly interested in adverse experiences occurring with human medical products that are unexpected and result in any of the following serious outcomes. They include adverse events resulting in death that are life-threatening, that cause hospitalization either new or prolonged, result in disability or incapacity, cause a congenital anomaly or birth defect, or any other event that requires an intervention to prevent any of the above based on clinical judgment. You can access the MedWatch form online and send it in electronically, or you can download the form and mail it or fax it. There's also an 800 number available if you have questions regarding the form. In order for a report that's entered into MedWatch to be received by the FDA, it must contain 4 components. 1 is a patient identifier, 2 is an event or problem, 3 a reporter, and 4 a specific product. But as healthcare providers, I would like you to provide much more information than these 4 items, because this is so critical in assessing causality. Components of a good post-marketing report include a detailed description of the adverse event, the drug product details, as many patient characteristics that you can identify, and documentation of the diagnosis. It's important to include the clinical course and outcomes, any relevant laboratory data or X-rays, any de-challenge or re-challenge information, and the reporter contact information. We will now move into the regulatory process for adverse drug reactions. The FDA Adverse Event Reporting System is the system that collects these MedWatch forms into a computerized database. This is a database of spontaneous reports containing human, drug, and therapeutic biologic reports. There are greater than 9 million reports that have been entered into this system since 1969, and more than 1 million reports were entered in 2014 alone. This brings us to our third challenge question. True or false? The frequency of experiencing adverse drug event X for a given drug can be determined through spontaneous reporting systems. If you answered false, you are correct. The FDA does not receive reports for every adverse event because it is a voluntary system. The frequency of an adverse event cannot be determined because we do not know the total number of people experiencing an adverse event, which would be the numerator, and we do not know the total number of people receiving the drug, also the denominator. FAERS is also subject to certain biases or limitations. First of all, the time on the product has been on the market can influence how many reports are entered into the system. In particular, during the first 3 years after a drug is approved, there are a large volume of reports entered compared to when the drug is older. Also, a public event or some news media flash could influence whether or not an adverse event is reported. So if something is in the news, other people may identify with that and start submitting reports as well. What does FDA do with the information that you submit? FDA uses the reports received to monitor for safety signals. A safety signal, as defined by the World Health Organization, is reported information on a possible causal relationship between an adverse event and a drug. The relationship being either previously unknown or incompletely documented. Usually, this requires more than 1 report, depending on the seriousness of the event and the quality of the information. FDA safety evaluators review individual reports for evidence of a relationship of the drug using causality, determining temporal association. For example, someone took the drug, the event developed, and after taking it for 7 days. And then also collects information on a de-challenge or re-challenge, because this provides stronger evidence for an association. This is also incorporated with other safety information from post-marketing surveillance. And these were the other types of post-marketing surveillance I described in a previous slide, such as observational or epidemiologic studies or active surveillance mechanisms. Where do safety signals come from? We have several sources. The reports you submit to the FDA are one. New clinical trial data from studies conducted after the drug was approved, such as in special populations or observational studies. An event reported in the news may be another source, as well as information that is gained from other foreign regulatory agencies, as we do have collaborations with other foreign regulatory agencies. Another way that we obtain safety signals is through data mining tools. And basically, this is a mathematical tool used to measure if an event is occurring at a higher frequency than what is expected. These tools are very useful when looking at large amount of reports, such as what is found in FAERS. So this brings us to our fourth challenge question. A safety signal could be A, a new previously unknown adverse event, B, a new drug interaction, C, an observed change in quantity, severity, or the affected population of a known adverse event, or D, all of the above. If you answered all of the above, you are correct. Safety signal illustrations include new unlabeled adverse events, an observed increase in a labeled event. By a labeled event, I mean something that is already listed in the package insert, an unrecognized drug-drug interaction. And as you recall, during clinical trials, we do not study all the possible combinations with these drugs. And a newly identified at-risk population. For example, perhaps patients with kidney disease or kidney dysfunction may be at higher risk for an adverse event for a particular drug. A safety signal is like a puzzle. We are trying to piece together. Look for trends, risk factors for the event, if concomitant medications are potentiating the event, or certain comorbid illnesses. These functions are the understanding part of pharmacovigilance that allows for the development of ways to prevent the adverse event or inform clinicians about the risk. Why is this so important? Generally, one individual event may not seem as important, but when you start seeing events being reported throughout the country that are well documented, this can provide a stronger case. It allows for the review of event trends. Safety evaluators look for these trends and patterns, such as age, sex, time to onset, dose, severity, outcome, and identify any risk factors. And this is the characterization part of looking at a safety signal. The net result of your efforts in reporting a potential adverse drug event, after all the evidence is taken into consideration, includes changes to the product labeling or the package insert, issuing of drug safety communications, alerting healthcare providers through a Dear Doctor letter, instituting risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, and on the extreme end, the option of market withdrawal, which would be dependent on the severity of the adverse event, such as if the event is causing deaths or liver failure or causing people to have a liver transplant. An example of this is the drug Rizulin or troglitazone, a diabetes drug that was removed from the market because of liver failure. I will now focus my efforts on risk evaluation and mitigation strategies as one of the regulatory outcomes. If there is a known risk, but the medication meets a specific need, a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy can be developed and initiated. This is a risk management plan that utilizes strategies that go beyond the professional labeling to ensure drug benefits outweigh the risks. The FDA Amendments Act of 2007 granted the FDA the authority to require the submission and implementation of a REMS. Prior to that, it was voluntary for manufacturers to issue a REMS. REMS are designed to meet specific serious risk mitigation goals. A mitigation guide informs patients about the risks associated with the drug and is given with each dispensed prescription. This is one component of the REMS that can be included. A communication plan, elements to assure safe use, and implementation systems are other components. A REMS can include one of these items or a combination of items. An example of a medication guide is with the drug Qsymia, a weight loss drug. And the purpose of the medication guide is to inform of congenital malformation risk and the importance of pregnancy prevention. Bydureon is a diabetes drug that has a communication plan. The communication plan is to inform healthcare professionals of the risks of acute pancreatitis and is issued as a Dear Doctor letter. Revlimid, a treatment for multiple myeloma, has an elements to assure safe use and an implementation system. For the elements to assure safe use, healthcare providers are specially certified and enrolled in the REMS program. Pregnancy testing needs to be performed within a certain time prior to prescribing the medication. And the implementation system is that the manufacturer maintains a secure database of certified physicians, enrolled patients, certified pharmacies, and monitors compliance with the certification. All of these must be assessed on predefined intervals or a timetable. And this is to ensure that the REMS is doing its job. As a result of your experience, safety issues will be communicated to the public, patients, and healthcare providers as MedWatch safety alerts, updates to the drug label or package insert, and various other communication methods such as drug safety podcasts. Post-marketing drug and biologic safety evaluations are conducted approximately 18 months after the approval of a new drug and summarize adverse experience reports submitted to the FDA. These reports aid in identifying new serious adverse events or potentially new safety concerns that were previously not identified during development process. Or they can also show an increase in a known event. The FDA MedWatch communication site is a one-stop shopping to obtain safety information. In the first box is where new information about a safety concern that the FDA identified. This may not be a confirmed safety issue and may be just an alert explaining that the FDA is currently reviewing that safety issue. You as a healthcare professional can stay informed by subscribing to the email alerts issued by the FDA, either through the MedWatch reporting system or getting communications about updated REMS. You can also subscribe to recalls and alert information. And finally, as listed on the bottom of the slide, is the 18-month evaluation of new drug is posted as such for this particular medication. In summary, be vigilant about assessing for adverse drug reactions. Post-marketing surveillance enhances the continuity of medication safety. Report all adverse drug events using the components of a good report. Publish adverse event case reports in the medical literature. Reporting your experiences can facilitate updating drug safety information. Play an active role in updating this safety information so that it can be communicated to the public health. Thank you.